Hello, welcome back to the preschool social communication skills training session. So the next thing we're going to think about is why might this happen? So there's lots of reasons why children might have social communication difficulties. One of which being autism spectrum disorder or autism spectrum conditions, as it can also be known, which might be causing a child to have difficulties in this area. There are also learning needs and other conditions which might not be fully picked up until the child is older, like ADHD. But the children who you're here supporting probably have speech and language difficulties. And it can't be underestimated the impact that having limited language can have on a child's interaction skills, particularly if they're at an age where their peers are able to communicate much more effectively using words. So that's going to limit the child's ability to make initiations and to maintain interactions with their peers. The child could have low self-esteem, low confidence in interactions. They might have sensory difficulties, which are if a child is so fixated on seeking out sensory stimulation or avoiding sensory stimulation, then that can really impact on their motivation to communicate with other people, their awareness of other people, because they're so fixated on that sensory experience. So that's definitely something to consider, as well as their language and communication needs. It's worth considering if there's been any family life difficulties, any significant traumas, any neglect or abuse, or anything that might be impacting on that child's social emotional skills and language development. So it can't be underestimated, again, the impact that that can have on a child's development of communication and language skills, particularly their social emotional development and ability to build up interactions with people. And the children might be delayed in their social communication skills. It might be that they're just that little bit behind in terms of their social emotional understanding of other people and with their what social rules are expected and what conventions are expected. Obviously, you've got to think of the developmental level that would be expected for a child of their age. Most children don't fully understand other people's thoughts and feelings until they're a lot older. But think about what you would expect for a child of that age, and consider, is there anything else at play? But obviously you're there to support them in your setting. So it's not really your role to consider diagnosing these children, but it's worth considering the factors that can influence why a child might be struggling in that way. So a really important thing to consider are children's different styles of communication. And everybody has their own style of communication, and it can be different in different situations. So we have our sociable child, who we're not really that worried about. They can be using words, they're not using words, doesn't really matter. They just love approaching people and engaging in an interaction with them. The shy child, I don't really like the word shy, because I think these children can just be a little bit more tentative, a bit more apprehensive in situations, maybe like to suss it out first or develop a bond with an adult, a familiar adult, and then they might come out a little bit. But with these children, it's important to take a step back and notice when they might be trying to communicate with you, because their attempts might not be as obvious as your sociable child. The children that we are most concerned about and that this training is most aimed at is our children who are passive or self-directed or own agenda children. So those two styles are more worrying, as you'll know as practitioners and early years practitioners, is because a passive child is a child who's not the shy child. They're just they're not very interested. They show less interest in other people around them and in the interactions of others. We notice that some children can become more passive when they're poorly, and that is a red flag for us. So generally in development, a child isn't meant to be passive and disinterested in their surroundings. So if there is, that would be a red flag. And these strategies can support these passive children to help them to engage in their surroundings. Self-directed own agenda children are children who prefer to follow their own agenda in play and interactions and have difficulty deviating from what they want to do and how they want to do it. So these children can become quite upset if you maybe get down at their level and play and fuss around with them or try and change or interfere with their play in any way. So it can, with these children, if they're quite fixated on what they want to do, it can be quite difficult to engage them in an interaction if they're very focused on their specific interest and what they're doing. So it's important to remember that all children can show different interaction styles at different times, but the children with the passive and the self-directed / own agenda children will just need our input a little bit more to help them to develop their language and communication skills. And we have to also consider that us as adults have our own communication styles that we will use. And like with everything else, we are different in different situations. And all of these communication styles are used by everybody at different times, and they all have their place when we're interacting with children. So I'll talk you through the gold standard that we want for communication, but we recognize that that's not possible all the time or feasible or sensible to be that responsive communicator all the time. So the different styles that are less desirable are things like the helpful communicator, somebody who is anticipating their child's needs and is helping that child to do things like zipping up their coat, giving them everything they need, helping them in situations wherever possible. And the problem with that communication style is it doesn't give the child the chance to attempt to communicate themselves, and it doesn't give them the reason for them to communicate because everything is given to them and they are helped with everything without having to ask. So it basically just takes away that need for the child to communicate with you. And then you've got the hurried communicator. So everyone knows what we're like when we're in a rush. We zip them up, we get them off, and we get them out. And that is fine. But the difficulty with that, with our passive children, our own agenda children, our more apprehensive, shy children, is that we might miss if they've attempted to communicate with us. So it's important to take a step back and slow down where you can to give those children the opportunities to attempt some kind of communication. The directing communicator, so that's kind of telling your child what to do, planning and kind of directing their play and their interactions, which also has its place if our children are struggling with that area. But also it's really important to take a step back and let them take the lead, because that then allows them to explore what they find interesting and for you to develop an understanding of what motivates them. Teaching, which you'll all be very familiar with because you are teaching these children skills to develop and learn. But I think the teaching communication style isn't ideal, as we describe it here, for developing interaction skills and communication skills, because it's often very question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. And the problem with that is you're not facilitating that free communication, that reciprocal back and forth communicating. And the child might feel a bit like they're being tested. And we can often do this a little bit more when children are slower to develop their language and communication skills, because when they do make progress, we're really keen to show everybody, and we'll say ball, or what's this? But we want to expand that child to be able to have two-way back and forth interactions, not to just be able to name every item in their surroundings. So Questions also have their place, and we need to test children to understand where they're at. But in everyday interactions, I would avoid questions where possible and make comments instead. So the responsive communicator is our gold standard, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is where you follow the child's lead, you get down to their level, you follow what they're interested in, and you just let them take that lead, and you just notice, you engage in what they're interested in and respond accordingly, rather than directing them or helping them or doing anything else. You take a step back and respond to their initiations and try and helping it to be more back and forth and get them to be interested, because we all know if we try and get a child to do something that they don't want to do, they're not going to learn the language, they're not going to be that interested. It's the same with adults. So we want to make sure that we help them learn language and communication skills around things that they find motivating. So the next step is how you can help. So we'll finish that stage here for that video and then log back into the next one when you're ready to develop some strategies. So thank you very much for listening to that one, and log back into the next one.